Hey everyone, and welcome to my very first tutorial video where today I'm going to be showing you how you can use HTML5 Canvas to make a start on a browser-based game. You will need a tiny little bit of JavaScript and HTML prerequisite knowledge, so if you don't know any JavaScript and any HTML at all, I recommend you go and check out W3 Schools. They have really great tutorials on their website. I'll leave a link in the description. Throughout this tutorial, I will be using Visual Studio Code. It's a great code editor, but you don't have to use it. You can use any raw text editor of your choice, including TextEdit on Mac and Notepad on PC. To start off with, I'll create a new HTML file and I will save it as index.html because that is a pretty standard thing in the industry. I'm going to copy and paste in a HTML skeleton, which is just the bare minimum that we need to actually have a web page, and you can find a link to this in the description alongside everything else that I use inside this video. We're only going to actually be making two changes to our HTML document, and the first of which is going to be to actually add the canvas element that we can use. So we just need canvas tags, and inside the canvas tags we just need to add a width and a height. I'm going to put my width as 1280 and my height as 720, but you can do whatever you choose. The second thing we need to do is link to our JavaScript script, which we actually haven't made yet, but it's about time that we decide on a name for it. I'm going to call mine main.js. You can call yours whatever.js. And that's all we need to do for the HTML document. Now we can quite easily test our HTML file by simply going to our File Explorer and dragging and dropping it into the browser. Now you won't see anything yet because there isn't anything on our canvas, but we can inspect and we can check to make sure that our canvas is actually there, which it is, so that's a success. If we return to our code editor, we can make our JavaScript file and save it as the same thing as we did before, which for me was main.js. Now that we have our JavaScript file, the first thing that we have to do is reference the actual canvas object. We do this by creating a new variable called canvas and assigning it to document, which is the actual web page, .querySelector. And then in the argument, you just want to pass in a canvas in inverted commas. All that is doing is it's finding the first HTML element in our document, which is a canvas. And in our case, we only have one canvas, so that works perfectly fine. Now on the next line, we're going to make another object, which is our drawer object, and we're just going to assign that to some curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, we're going to put all the properties that belong to the drawer object. The drawer object is just going to handle all of the drawing onto the canvas. The first property of the drawer object is going to be the context of the canvas. What the context is it's effectively just a giant array of color values which we can manipulate in order to manipulate what we see on the canvas. We abbreviate context to CTX, and we assign it using a colon since it's a property of the drawer, not a normal variable. Now we get the context from the canvas using the getContext method. And then we just pass in 2D because that's the type of context that we want. Rather than directly modifying the contents of the context array, instead we access special properties of the context which allow us to intuitively draw onto the canvas. Drawer.ctx.fillStyle changes the color or style that we're going to fill. We can use any CSS color selector. I'll just be using green. Now we go drawer.ctx.fillRect. FillRect draws a rectangle onto the canvas in the fill style color. It takes four properties. Firstly, where we're going to start from, which we'll just put 0, 0, which is the top left of the canvas, and then the width and height, which we'll just put 100, 100. Now that we have some working JavaScript, we can test it by refreshing the browser, and as you can see, it does actually make our green square. Now that we've tested out JavaScript, we can modify our drawer object by adding some more properties to it so that we can make some more complex drawings. Firstly, since we'll be doing a little bit of animating, we'll be adding an FPS. FPS stands for frames per second, and is how many times our canvas is going to be updated each second, and we'll use 25. We use commas when we're listing the properties because it's a list. The next property that we're going to add to the drawer object is a method called update. It's going to run 25 times per second, or whatever our frame rate is, and it's a function. It has no parameters, and inside it we're just going to move our code from before, so now it's inside the update function. Now we can add some variables to our code so that we can start animating. We'll start with var x equals 0 and y equals 0 as well. Now that we have these variables, we can replace 0, 0 inside the call of the fillRect function with x and y. Since x and y are variables, we're going to need them to actually do some changing. To do that, we'll add 1 to x 25 times per second, and we'll add 2 to y. Because the fillStyle and fillRect methods are now being called inside the drawer object, we don't actually have to write drawer anymore. We can just write this, and it is good practice to do so. And finally, we need to actually call it 25 times per second, so we will write setInterval and the name of the function we want to call, which is drawer.update. When we pass the drawer.update method into the setInterval function, it's actually going to lose its reference to the drawer object, which means this.ctx will just be undefined. In order to avoid this, we're going to use .bind drawer to bind it back to the drawer object. Now we're just going to have one more parameter, which is how often we want to call it in milliseconds. And since we're calling it 25 times per second, and there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second, we're going to go 1,000 divided by drawer.fps, which will give us 40 millisecond frames. We can test it in the browser now, but we have missed one step. Can you work out what it is before I show you? Well, basically, the square is being drawn every frame in a new position, but where it was in the last frame is not being cleared. In order to solve this, we just need to return to our code, where we are going to add one more line. It's one more method of the context, this.ctx.clearRect, which works just like the fillRect, but just clears it back. And we'll go 0, 0, and the canvas.width, which returns the width which we specified earlier, and canvas.height, which does the same thing. Now when we test it, success. As you can see, we were successfully able to make one square move, which obviously isn't really a game quite yet, but if we had x and y changing conditionally based on, say, user interaction from the mouse and keyboard, we could start to make something interesting. To learn all of that and more, stay tuned because I'm going to be making more tutorial videos after this one. I really hope you learned something, and if you did, make sure to subscribe. See ya!